Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's case study. Today, we're going to talk a bit about how I helped an investor reduce his tax liability by 63%. We're going to talk a bit about how just by restructuring your affairs quite simply actually really helps you reduce your tax liability by, or rather, can help you reduce your tax liability quite significantly. So, getting into it, just the disclaimers: this is not financial advice, shouldn't be considered financial advice. And of course, we're an authorized financial services provider, 42606. So, let's get into some of the facts of our individual. He's 74 years old, he is retired, he doesn't have any family, he's not married, but he does live with his partner. His total monthly expenses 40,000 Rand a month. Taxable income for in the last tax year was 1.17 million. So yeah, he does have a fairly high income. He has four sources of income, right? So one is the interest on his the money that he has. The second is rent. The third is income from annuities, and the fourth is an income from consulting business that he runs on the side. He has 10.7 million Rand just sitting in bank accounts, money market, and fixed deposits. He has three annuities worth about 1.8 million Rand. So, yeah, obviously the lion's share of his portfolio is in banks. He has two properties. One of them he leases out, and he paid 341,000 Rand in tax in the last tax year. So that's a pretty high tax burden. All right, moving on to the constraints. And what I mean by constraints is that as financial planners, we have to build plans around the individual who's in front of us, right? So, and that person might have pet hates, dislikes, certain criteria that needs to be met, and we need to design our plan around that for that individual. So this guy said that he wants to have access to the money at all times. He is quite risk averse, so a fairly conservative guy. He doesn't have any concern with estate duty, so he's pretty much, once I die, that's it, and I don't really care what happens to the money after. Or rather, I don't care what happens to the tax after I die. He wants to live in South Africa. So those are the constraints that we're going to build our plan around. Okay, and yeah, obviously our objectives are to help reduce that tax burden while maintaining a reasonable rate of return given the constraints and the risk profile. So yeah, this guy said he's conservative, so we've got to build a plan around his risk profile, and make him comfortable. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? So, step one, I did a calculation to determine how much money he's going to need to live in South Africa or to meet his expenses in South Africa in rands for a period of 10 years. We used a resultant rate. So, a resultant rate is a number determined by combining a growing income, or rather a growing investment, which you draw income from. So N, that's obviously the 10-year period, and PMT, so that's the income that's required annually at 50,000 Rand a month. So the total amount that he needs to keep invested in South Africa or to meet his expenses for the next 10 years is going to be 4.915 million. I just rounded that up to 5 million to make it easier. And we assume that he's going to get 9% per year, and that will escalate at 5% per annum. So that 50,000 is going to increase by 5% every year for the next 10 years, and that's quite important. Okay, step two, we're going to set up a local investment portfolio on one of the asset management platforms that are available in South Africa. And we're going to split that portfolio up, right? So immediately we're going to put 50% or 2.5 million Rand into income funds. Now, these are two income funds with different asset managers and who have different views on income. So the one has a yield. Yeah, I did an average yield here, so an average yield of 9.91% in rands. Um, Obviously, that doesn't mean his total return for the year is gonna be 9.91%, but yeah, provided the bond market remains stable. So that yield though is significantly higher than that of a pure money market fund. So of the total portfolio, approximately 75.45% of that will be allocated to the cash and bonds portion, which will provide him with interest income. The remaining 50% will be placed into stable or cautious funds. These funds are primarily made up of interest bearing instruments and cash, some bonds, um, other forms of securities that provide interest income. And that will help the investment provide a much higher return, ideally, than inflation over a 10-year period than you would, just by sitting in money market or income funds, ideally. So the remainder of the portfolio is largely allocated to equity. And yeah, should also state that the dividends that you receive from shares or equities, that's automatically taxed at 20% before it even goes into your investment account. So that money is flat taxed 20%. The other 75% you're still going to earn interest on it, and the approximate annual interest that's going to be generated from this client's investments is 373,000, but only 339,000 rand will be taxable because he qualifies for the interest exemption, the higher interest exemption, because of his age. All right, so moving on to step three, and this is more of the important part. So this 5 million, the idea is to send it offshore and invest it in offshore domiciled unit trusts, and half of the portfolio immediately will be invested into um, foreign income funds. So those are primarily dollar-based funds that have that invest in U.S. Treasuries or U.S. bonds, as well as other securities as well. So half of that, so 2.5 million rand, is going into that, and that's really for peace of mind for the client. He Yeah, like I mentioned previously, he has a tendency to be quite conservative. So we want at least half of that to be available in cash, if he wants to bring it back into South Africa again. So those two funds combined have an average yield of 4.85% in US dollars, which is quite reasonable, considering that interest rates in the US have been at zero for about the last for quite a while, and have only picked up in the last couple of years. The other 50% of the portfolio is allocated to equity. And you'll notice that, even though he's a conservative investor, why would I suggest going into equity? And the reason for that is because that the money in those equity funds will probably not be touched between 10 and 15 years. So it's an incredibly long time to just be sitting in cash. So it's incredibly important to try and offset some of the dollar inflation and get a real return on that investment. So that's why I've suggested over that 10 to 15 year period, just allocate it to equity, because we need a higher return. This money is going to be invested offshore for quite a long time. And so that's why I considered an equity fund to actually be quite appropriate in this situation. I mentioned previously that I had budgeted for 50,000 rand a month, or his expenses are 40,000 rand a month. So I'd budgeted for 50,000 rand a month to be the client's income. So that money might actually last a bit longer than the 10 years if he decides to take less than that, less than 50,000 rand a month. So this money could be invested offshore for quite a while. Another very important thing to note is that the income, that, or rather the interest that's made in the global income funds, are in what's called a roll-up fund or rollover fund. So what happens here is that In a local South African unit trust, domiciled local South African unit trust that pays out rand denominated interest, you need to declare that interest income every single year in your tax return, and that tax needs to be paid over in that tax year. With a rollover fund, what happens to that is that the interest is actually unitized, so you don't have to pay tax on it in that tax year. So this guy could be, gaining interest on those income funds for a period of 10 years, and he doesn't have to declare that interest. The only issue that you will run into eventually is that capital gains tax will apply on the disinvestment. So what that means is that at the end of his investment period, when he decides to sell, he'll pay anything between 12 and 18% based on his marginal tax rate at the time. So obviously that will help eliminate quite a lot of the tax liability that he's got at the moment. So once we've implemented everything, let's look at how many of the boxes that we tick. All right. So the results: this guy has access to his money at all times, whether it's offshore or onshore. He's got access to it, complete flexibility. He's fairly risk averse, like I said. So we've set up the portfolio to be fairly conservative, but we've taken a bit more risk with the 2.5 million rand offshore because we know that it's going to be invested for a very long time, between 10 and 15 years. And this investor has a lot of money still in South Africa to supplement his income for the next 10 years, and he still has that 2.5 million offshore, which he can dip into if he needs to. So his income needs are pretty much covered for the next 10 to 15 years without a shadow of a doubt. Okay, no concern with estate duty. We're not going to delve into the estate duty side too much today, although it is a fairly significant point for most people. Um, and of course, this investor wants to live in SA. That's a tick, right? He gets to stay in South Africa. He gets to live in the sun and invest in the shade, as I like to say. And of course, we help reduce his tax by 63% from 341 grand down to 124,000 rand in the next tax year. So all in all, yeah, this guy has had a yeah, he's going to benefit quite nicely from just by structuring his affairs differently, a little bit differently, and yeah, and it just goes to show you how you can set up your affairs and by making some minor tweaks and end up saving quite a lot on the tax liability. Okay, yeah, and lastly, if you have any questions or inquiries, please send them to me on that email address, jonathand@hampshireind.co.za. Retirement is probably going to be the biggest decision that most individuals will ever make in their life. Most people stop working between 60 and 65, and their income their money has to last them about 30 years, up to 30 years. Let me say that, up to 30 years. So it's important to really, when you're making the decision how to structure your affairs, to get that right the first time. So definitely consult with somebody who is well versed in the topic, and who you trust. Financial advice is primarily based on trust. You trust that the person on the other end is number one, professionally qualified, and number two, knows what he's talking about and quite experienced. So yeah, with that being said, I just want to say thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care.